Well, everyone, this is our last week together. I really appreciate the time you've all put in and the hard work you've all put in. This is amazing. So, just to kind of recap what we've been through, we talked about HR and management's responsibility for hiring, developing, and retaining employees. And for the last couple of weeks, we've talked about retention. So, how do we retain employees? And so, chapter 12 here in our human resource management book basically lays out one of the key ways that we retain employees, and that is through pay. And so, unit 12, I'm sorry, chapter 12, we're going to talk about pay structure in our last week. And so, let's just jump right in and we will get going here. So, first of all, what we're going to cover today are the three key pay decisions. First of all, that's pay level. So the average amount that we are willing to pay for a particular job structure, which is relative pay for the different jobs that we have within our organization, and then pay structure. So job structure, then pay structure, and that's our pay policy resulting from the job structure and pay level decisions. Okay, so first we lay out here's our pay levels, right? Here's do we want to be above average pay levels for an organization? Do we want to be kind of fit within the same category as other companies similar to ours, or do we want to pay lower? And then we want to look at what different jobs do we have within the organization. Those different jobs are going to dictate different pays. And then finally, we tie those two together and develop an actual pay structure. So, building a pay structure, here's the first things we need to think about. First of all, legal requirements, market forces, and then organizations are goals. So, legal requirements, equal pay for equal work, right? We have a minimum wage. Depending on the state you work in, there's a federal minimum wage, which has to be abided by. But also in the state of California, for example, we have a much higher minimum wage than we do at a federal level. We have to think of overtime pay and we have to think of child labor restrictions. For market forces, right? We have to think of product markets, labor markets, and competitive pressures, right? And so for product markets, what are we selling and what does our product or what is our service, what does it warrant in terms of a sale, in terms of a revenue? And then we also need to think about from a labor market, are we in a down market or an up market? And is unemployment high or is unemployment low? Are there more accountants out on the street? Are there more finance people on the street? So we need to think about the supply and demand of the labor market. And then we also need to think of other competitive pressures, right? So if we're competing against a company for labor, well, then we need to maybe pay higher to get the best talent and steal those people away from our competitors. Okay. And then finally, we need to think of our organization's goals, right? We want a high quality workforce, and this everybody, it should be every organization's goal. Have a high quality workforce, control costs, create an atmosphere or a culture of equity and fairness, and then we have to abide by legal compliance. And so these three factors, right, they converge to shape how we pay our pay rates, our pay grades, our pay ranges, and our pay differentials. Some of the legal requirements we have to deal with equal pay. So, equal employment opportunity, the EEO, that means pay differences must be not based on age, sex, race, or other protected status. Legitimate factors like experience, skills, seniority, job performance, specific technological skills, specific job functions, again, and job performance. Those can dictate, those different things can dictate pay ranges, different pay ranges. But if it's a protected class, you cannot dictate a pay range based on protected class. The Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009 strengthened these protections against pay discrimination. So here's a perfect example. Two employees doing the same job cannot be paid different wages because of race, sex, or age. Only differences in experience, skills, seniority, or performance justify pay variations. Now, is that true? Does that really happen? Sometimes it doesn't. I'll be honest with you, there's lots of studies out there, folks, women potentially make 80 to 85 cents on the dollar of men who are doing the same job with the same experience. And so there are companies out there that have gone to court and that have fought this, that pay disparities between men and women still exist, and it's a travesty. And so I talk about this in all my classes, right? When I talk about equity, particularly pay equity, this is one of the first things I bring out. Even today, 2020, 2025, 20, going into the future potentially, they've closed the gap, but it's still anywhere from 85 to 87 cents on the dollar what women get paid. And a lot of that sometimes has to do with what's something we're going to talk about at the end of this session, and that's about asking for money, right? And your initial pay out of school will dictate a lot of times what you're paid going forward. So negotiations are really important, okay? So those are some of the legal requirements. Another one is the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA. And so that dictates minimum wage. Current minimum wage is 7.25 an hour federally, and that can go up and down. And they say that's a living wage based on region. I don't know if that's a living wage. Here in the state of California, it's much higher than that. Okay, so there's a minimum wage set. Overtime pay. Employers must pay 1.5 times usual rate for hours beyond 40 hours a week. In some states, it's anything over 8 hours. And then there's overtime, right? Exempt employees, though, are not subject to overtime pay. So you'll have two different distinctions. You'll have exempt employees and you'll have non-exempt employees. And we'll talk about that in another slide. Exempt employees are not eligible for overtime. Child labor, that's part of the FLSA, right? Children under 14 generally cannot work. Ages 14 to 15 have strict limits, and ages 16 and 17 cannot work hazardous jobs. And then prevailing wage. Federal contractors must pay at least prevailing wage. And so that's the Davis-Bacon Act and the Walsh-Healy Act. And so federal contractors must pay at least prevailing wage. So those are the legal issues we have to deal with pay. The market forces also shape pay, right? So product markets, organizations compete on quality, service, and price, right? And so if we think about labor as a significant expense in this, we need to think about getting the most we can out of our employees for unfortunately sometimes the least amount because again labor cost in a down market not so much, in a profitable market, in a 1% unemployment market, or sometimes even a 0% unemployment market, labor costs are going to increase. And particularly for manufacturing, the more manufacturing you do, the more labor you need. The more labor you need, the more you're going to have to pay. And so again, labor is a significant expense. So when we think of product markets, part of that expense of sending out a product or sending out a service is the labor expense. Labor markets, competition for talent establishes the minimum pay in whatever region you're in. So, again, one region, Austin, Texas could be just doing amazing. The economy could be booming, and the labor market there is tight. And so, there's not a lot of people out looking for jobs. And so, you got to pay more to get talent. You come here to California, maybe in San Diego, our market's not doing so well. And so, there, you can then get quality talent for a much lower price. Okay. So competition for talent, that's what establishes minimum pay, influenced by other things, cost of living, consumer price index. So if the CPI is high, we need to pay our employees more so they can afford to buy the things that they need to live. If our cost of living here in San Diego is higher, we need to pay a higher wage. Again, if you think about places like San Francisco or LA or New York City or Chicago, the cost of living there is so high, companies have to pay more, particularly in San Francisco. Companies have to pay more. So those two things also determine what your pay is going to be for the labor market. Okay. Strong demand. And here's another one. Nurses means hospitals must pay competitive wages. So yeah, anything in healthcare is you're gonna have to pay a lot more. Okay. Accounting, you're gonna have to pay a lot more. Finance, you're typically gonna have to pay a lot more. And there's other occupations where you don't have to pay as much. Pay level strategy. So, how do we decide what to pay? Range is going to really depend on the competitive environment, like we just talked about, right? What's the market rate for pay? What's the market rate for a specific job? Really, you need to rely on HR for this help. If you're a manager, you're typically going to look to HR to do some competitive analysis, to do research, to talk to their organizations. You need to collect as much data as you possibly can. You're going to look through the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You're going to use, the SHRM, right? Society of Human Resources. NHRA, the National Human Resource Association, they're going to have statistics. You're going to get all sorts of salary surveys. You're going to gather as much information you can on specific jobs to figure out where you fit in which region. And so it really does depend. And what you're paying an entry level person now coming out of college could be totally different than what you pay them next year. It could be more, believe it or not, it could be less. Just because we move through time doesn't mean rates always increase. So, something to think about when you're also looking for a job. So, the strategy really does need to revolve around good, clean, timely data. Um, what do employees think about fairness, right? Most employees think, again, external equity, fairness of one's pay is relative to what employees and other organizations earn for the same job. That's true, but a lot of times, they're looking at, again, you could be working in San Diego and you're comparing yourself, you're a computer programmer in San Diego. You cannot compare yourself to a computer programmer in Orange County, California, or San Francisco. You have to look at your region. You also have to look at the size of the company that you're working for, right? So if I'm working for, a $10 billion company as an accountant, and then I look at what I'm making is in comparison to what accountants are making at Qualcomm or Viasat or Illumina or any one of these larger Thermo Fisher, some of these Fortune 500s, it's probably not going to be the same. So you need to match apples to apples. If you're comparing numbers, they need to be really specifically equal, right? So that means I need to compare my salary to other companies that are $10 billion companies in the same industry, in the same location. Internal equity, that's fairness of one's pay relative to their coworkers. That's a whole other thing. Used to be, if you talked about salaries to your coworkers, you'd get fired. Nowadays, we're trying to create more transparent pay structures. And so a lot of times you kind of know what everybody's making. And so then it creates again this not just need, but almost a requirement for equity, right? Almost a requirement for equity. So there are so many sources out there for, again, Glassdoor, Indeed, salary.com. You can go to temporary staffing agencies and they all put out salary surveys every year uh, depending on the uh, depending on the occupation. So they'll have accounting salary surveys, computer salary, science salary surveys, finance salary surveys, and then you can get that information and use it. And you should get that information when you're negotiating, right? Again, the negotiation piece is the big piece. Job evaluation, right? So identifying compensable factors, characteristics the organization values. Again, if you've got a company that values somebody with tech skills like Python or advanced Excel or Tableau, data visualization, then you need to look at, right? Those skills are going to rate higher. And then you rate each job. You evaluate jobs on experience, education, complexity, working conditions, and then you define key jobs. Jobs with stable content, common among organizations that can be based on a survey data. So that would be every company has an accounting crew. Every company typically has marketing. Every company typically has HR. Every company typically has IT. So those are stable content common among organizations that you can actually do comparisons to. If you're working at Viasat, which is a defense contractor, you wouldn't compare yourself typically if you're working in project management there to a project manager at Johnson and Johnson or Illumina, because that project manager is doing much more complex. Maybe it's biology, maybe it's technical engineering. Your project management could be something totally different. So you really need to think about the job title, the experience level, the education level, and the complexity of the work. You take all these numbers, you compile them together, and you figure out how you evaluate that job. Creating the pay structure, again, you want to look at different pay rates. Almost every company is going to have at least two of these, right? You're going to have an hourly rate. That's a rate per hour worked. Some companies will have piecework, but that's typically for temporary or contract employees. And then you'll have a salary. That's a weekly, monthly, or yearly rate. And so, again, we look at non-exempt and exempt has nothing to do with the pay rate, right? So an hourly rate, an exempt employee could have an hourly rate. They're just not eligible for overtime, right? What happens is there's certain things that define what an exempt versus a non-exempt employee. Most exempt employees are salaried, right? They're paid on a yearly basis. But there are those rare exceptions where they're hourly. But you look at, are they managing people? Is this what they would consider a professional job? What type of work are they doing? So again, an exempt employee is exempt from overtime. A non-exempt employee is non-exempt from overtime, which means they get overtime. Usually and almost always, our non-exempt employees are hourly wage employees. So we have our pay rates, right? Hourly, piecework, salary. We have our pay grades. Those are set of jobs with similar worth grouped together. So you have your computer science jobs, you have your accounting and finance jobs, you have your marketing jobs, and each one of those is going to have their own pay grade. And then you're going to have, when you're particularly looking at jobs, the job search process, you're going to have pay ranges, right? So you're going to have a minimum, maximum, and a midpoint for pay for jobs within that grade. So we've got the pay rates. Is this an hourly rate, a piecework rate, or a salaried rate? What's the pay grade? So this job, an hourly rate for a computer science job, the hourly rate is $47 an hour for or even better yet, nursing. So for a nurse, just a general nurse, the hourly rate is $30 an hour. For a nurse manager, it's a salary, right? Which is the nurse one is an hourly rate at a specific pay grade. Different if you work in the ER or if you work in surgery, those might have different pay grades than somebody working in pediatrics or newborn, right? And then you have a manager, a nurse manager. That person's going to have a salary, right? They're going to be paid a salary at a different pay grade. And then even at that level, you could have different pay ranges where you're paying somebody who's doing the same job, potentially the minimum rate, and then somebody maybe the midpoint or the maximum rate. Okay. So current pay structure issues. Here's a couple of things. We're almost done here. Military duty pay. I don't know. This is my own personal opinion. I think people who are in the military don't get paid enough for the job that they do. And so I've had long arguments with people about this where, oh, they get free food, they get free housing, whatever. I think I looked the minimum pay or the minimum hourly rate for, I want to say a private is like $12 an hour. It was something crazy like that. $12 an hour to serve our country, and you could go to Chick-fil-A and make $20 an hour. And that's my issue. But I will say this, it's dictated by law, so there's really not much you can do. It's the Reemployment Rights Act, but I do really think military duty pay is too low, and I also think executive compensation is too high. Although we're a free market society, so technically you're allowed to pay anybody basically as much as you want. Now you can't pay them as little as you want, but you can pay them as much as you want. So these CEOs who are making, uh, you know, $10 million a year just in salary, plus they get bonuses and stock options. I mean, that's your right to do that. That's a company's right to do that. This is a fair labor market. And so if that's what it's going to take to get somebody on board, that's what you pay them. If that's what the market bears. And so you have to think about stuff like that, okay? Uh, so really quick, just to quickly go through negotiations, I want to make everybody aware of this. 70%, so most people, particularly one of the reasons women are paid less, particularly women, do not like to negotiate their salary. Not sure why it is, but the statistics show that, prove that out, that typically women do not like to negotiate salary. And so, and even guys a lot of times don't like to negotiate salary. But here's what a statistic you have to know: 70% of all managers fully expect you to negotiate your salary. And so it's not what you say, it's how you say it, folks. You don't go in and say, I'm only going to do this job if it pays this much. No, thank you so much for the offer. I just feel so blessed or whatever. Feel so thankful for this. I'm really excited to get started, get rolling. I am interested. Is there an opportunity to discuss the salary? Here's what I was looking for, right? And so, and they're not going to go, oh, no, we rescind the offer. No, they're going to say, oh, okay, well, let's talk about that. 70% of all managers expect you to negotiate. For any of you that are interested in talking about negotiating salaries, this is what I do, right? This is one of my key skills is helping people come up with the words to negotiate a salary. It doesn't always result in a higher salary, but at least you ask the question and it does make you stand out in the positive. So take advantage, 70%. Um, what do you do pre-negotiating? How do you know what to ask for, folks? How do you know what to ask for? Right? You don't just take whatever they say they're going to pay you. You need to know what to ask for. That starts with setting a budget. How much do I need? Right? How much do I need? Understanding if the company and the role are a fit. Is this something I really want or I'm just taking it? If it's something I really want, then maybe I'm willing to take a little less. But if it's a job, then maybe I need to take a little bit more. Right? Where can you be flexible? Is it possible to be flexible? What's your walkaway offer? You have to know what your walkaway number is. And then you have to understand the current market and pay benefits for the area you're working in. So not just the area, but the city you're working in, the type of company you're working in, and the role that you're taking. You have to know what the current market looks like. Okay. So any of you want to discuss negotiating pay any further, you know where to reach me. You can always connect with me and we can take care of that. So, folks, what a great 8 weeks. I really appreciate all the hard work you put in, and I'm looking forward to helping you out any way that I can. You have my contact information. Always, please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about career, about pace, negotiation, anything like that. I am here for you. And so, thanks again for a great semester and we will be talking to you soon.